the video that you've been watching and enjoying, that is the 100th anniversary parade in Northville in 1927. Northville turned 100 years old in 1927. In that parade, my father will talk about his parents are in there in a float. His father is pulling a float with a Model T, and his mother has a new washer. So in history around Northville, Michigan, my father's parents his father was an electrician in Northville, with an electric store here in Northville and one up in Williamston. They basically wired all the homes in this side of the state. They would bring a wire out to all the different farms. His great buddy was the barber in Northville. And the barber in Northville's daughter ended up marrying the electrician's son. So she was the valedictorian of 1936, and he was the president of 1937. So it was a sweetheart romance from the beginning. And just going back in time, on the latest History of Northville book, if any of you see it downtown, that is the spot where Bruce Turnbull was born. That was the original Northville electric shop. And then later on, when Dillinger came through town, we robbed the hardware store where Baby is, and the Northville electric store ended up buying that store. So this was the first one, and then they moved downtown, so that Baby store is still there today. That was the Northville electric store when I was pretty small, many years ago. So a lot of history. There's a table over there with different history books. My father, Bruce Turnbull, has been involved with the writing of a lot of history and walking tours, and people would listen to him and write down all of his observations. Because he's one of the last of the Mohicans, we call him. He is the historian of Northville, kind of by default. He has lived the history, and he's going to tell you a lot about that tonight in the next hour. At the end of the night, if you have any questions, the little cards on your table, he will answer every question. If you have an email, most of you are pretty modern in here. If you have an email, just let us know your email and your question, and he will respond to all of those in the next week or so. Because I'm this slide guy, and I'll try to respond to you. If you don't, he will write you a note. Just give us your address. Also on that same card, again, if you want any of those booklets, let us know. The church will provide that to you. So with that, the person that's been around Northville 96 years, grew up here, you're going to hear a lot of stories about Northville, about Bruce Turnbull, and many of you in the audience have lived some of those stories. I've talked to many of you tonight, and Jean Angel is going to be part of one of the slides here, and her family too. So with that, without further ado, I'd like to bring up Mr. Bruce Turnbull. Bruce.
I don't know who Brian was talking about, but this was me. Anyhow, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Turnbulls, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Northville, and then I'll get into some of the stories. Northville, for a town, a city now, of 7,000 people, is probably the most famous town in Michigan. And I'll elaborate on some of the things that makes it so famous. My father came to Northville in 1917 by streetcar from Pontiac. He liked Northville very well, so he bought a building and opened an electrical store there. In 1919, like Brian was saying, I was born upstairs over the electrical store. And let's see, where we go from there. In 1933, my mother said to, oh, excuse me, back up a little bit. I was brought up a Baptist here in Northville for my first 21 years. In 1933, my mother said, I don't like this minister. I've got to get rid of him. And my father was on the board. He said, I like the ministry. And if you don't like the ministry, you can go and join the Methodist Church. There's nothing nicer than joining the Methodist Church. So in 1933, she joined the Methodist Church. And she was a member of the church here. And so she died in 19, when she was 74 years old. And then she was buried right here in this church at her burial. My father and mother got married in Pontiac at the Baptist Church. And then when my sister got married in 1942 to George Russell, and they got married in the Methodist Church, the one down on Dunlap Street. So after they got married, why then George joined the Navy because World War II was going on. I got married in the Catholic Church in 1945, and so I joined the Marine Corps during World War II. Brian joined the Methodist Church here in Northville. Well, excuse me, back up. Brian and Ann got married in the Methodist Church here in Northville in 1983. So Brian took over the men's club. So he's in charge of the men's club. He's in charge of the Methodist trout hunters of the north looking for trout fish. And, so he's involved in quite a few things there. And his wife, she's involved in a lot of things in the Methodist Church. So anyhow, all my life we've been taking care of the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, and the Catholic Church. So we've got everything pretty well under control. Okay, just a little bit about Northville. Northville, I'll back up a little farther than that. Michigan become a state. Well, this is on your test questions. Remember this one. I'll tell you when the test questions are. Michigan become a state in 1837. And at that time, the surveyors came through this part of the country, and they laid out a baseline. They need a baseline. So they took baseline right through Northville. We call it 8 Mile Road, but 8 Mile Road is the baseline. Now remember this one. This is a good one on your test. They laid out all the counties in the state of Michigan from baseline right through Northville. Very, very unusual, and it's the only town going east and west. They went from Lake Huron all the way to Lake Michigan, right through Northville. In 1855, Northville was in the village of Northville, the township of Plymouth. On my abstract at my house, it says Village of Northville, County, Township of Plymouth. In 1855, Plymouth said, we're going to have a new township here in Plymouth. And Northville said, the heck you are. They're going to have the township here in Northville. Well, they got a big argument. So they finally said, hey, look, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take half the township for Plymouth and half the township for Northville. And you can do what you want with there. So then, that's another special thing. That's on your test. Northville is only a half a township. So half in Plymouth, half in Northville. Instead of being 16 square miles, it's only 8. So that's very, very unusual for any kind of a town. Another thing that's kind of unusual in Northville, when I was little, Northville just went up to Wayne County, and 8 Mile Road was in Wayne County. After World War II, Northville started expanding. They said to Novi, hey, Novi, we need some more land. And they said, oh, what? How much do you need? They said, well, we need about a half a mile. And we'd like to take 8 Mile Road and go up to 8.5 Mile Road. And they said, oh, that's okay. So then Northville expanded up to 8.5 Mile Road, all the way from Novi Road, all the way to Taft Road. A little later on, why Northville wanted to expand some more, so then they went beyond that. They went from Taft Road all the way to Beck Road. So that's when Northville kept expanding. It's very, very unusual. On the north side of 8 Mile Road, going out toward Beck, is the city of Northville. On the south side of 8 Mile Road is the township, which is very, very unusual. So then, that's on your test also. Northville become half in Oakland County and half in Wayne County. Another very, very unusual situation. Okay, I think that's about all the unusual parts about Northville, but Northville is a wonderful town, and now we'll start talking about a lot of things here. If I talk too long, well, you just can throw me out. Okay, the first one here is kind of interesting. Northville started, they had a grist mill here in Northville in 1826. You remember that's on your test too. 1826, Northville had a grist mill here. And Northville didn't have a name yet. So they finally said, well, what's the name of your little village here? They said, well, there's a little town in Plymouth, and then there's another little town of Phoenix on the corner of 5 Mile Road and Northville Road. There's another little town called Waterford, and it's on the corner of 6 Mile Road and Northville Road. And he said, well, what's the name of that tiny little town? And he said, well, it's not named yet, but it is the North Village of the 4 villages. The other villages are south of us. The North Village became Northville. Another test question. Okay. In 1839, in Northville and all around here, it was still pretty wild. There were bear and wolves and of course a lot of deer. The deer that are around here in Northville now, they didn't come down from up north. They came from these rich men, Henry Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, all the different executive people. They all had deer, and they let the deer go. When I was a little boy, we used to go down to Mr. Henry Ford's to see some deer. He had some deer penned up on his seat. So, in my estimation, that's where all the deer came from around Northville. They didn't come from up north. They came right, some of them might have come from up north. Most of them came right from all these different rich people that they got deer so much they just turned the deer loose and let them go. Okay, the first one here, a man named Mr. Thornton. This was back in 1839. You take that one, Brian. In 1839, Mr. Thornton lived out on the corner of 9 Mile Road and Novi Road, which is 9 Mile Road and Novi Road. He had a bunch of cattle. And every day he would milk the cows and take the milk and put it in a milk can and bring it to Northville. He would go up and down the streets of Northville. Northville just had about, I would probably say 50 or 60 families. And so everybody had a little pail. You want to get that little pail there, Brian, in the middle there? Yeah. He would go up and down the street with his big pipe or big gallon of milk, and he would take a scooper, and the ladies of the house would come out of the house, and he'd put the milk in the little container. And so they would thank him, and they'd pay him for him. I suppose maybe it was a nickel, maybe a penny. I'm not sure, but it wasn't very much. So then the next day he'd come back again, and they'd come out with their little pail and get some milk. One day, he went home, and he said to his wife, "Hey, honey, anything happened today?" "Well," she said, "let me tell you. There really has something happened today." He said, "Tell me all about it." "Well," she said, "I was making some homemade bread. And it was a hot day in the summertime, so I had the door open. And I opened up the door, and what do you think? In came a bear. And so it was a pretty good sized bear, weighed about 200 pounds. So she had her apron on, and she had her ladle there, and she hollered at him and banged at him. He paid no attention to her. He started coming toward her. So she, in those days in the log cabins, they didn't have any ladders, or didn't have any steps. They had ladders that went up into the second story. So she went to run up in the ladder, and right beside the fireplace, Mr. Thornton had left his axe. So she grabbed the axe, and up the steps she went. She got up to the top step, and the bear started coming right up the steps. And it was either him or her. So she waited until he got his head up to the top of the steps. And she was a lady probably about 40 years of age, real husky. So she took a real good swat at that bear and slit its head open and killed it. And the bear went down the steps and lay there on the base of the ladder. So her husband said, "Wow, are you kidding?" She said, "Honey, there's the bear." And the bear still had the axe in his head. True story. So she was quite famous, Mrs. Thornton, for killing the bear in Northville. The Northville ski jump. Northville was another thing, this is on your test too. Northville was the ski jump capital of Michigan in 1920. From 1920 to 1923, the ski jump capital of Michigan. And Mr. Hall, there were six Hall brothers. Henry was the best ski jumper. And so on Sundays, they would have the ski jump, and the ski jump hill was right now on the corner of 7 Mile Road and Hines Parkway Drive. It's right down there by the liquor store. So people with the hill is real steep there, and they had a 50-foot tower that they built on top of that hill. From that top of that hill is so steep. A few years ago, when I was a couple of years younger, I thought, I think I can crawl up that hill. So I tried to crawl up that hill, and I finally made it. But I had to grab on grapevines and trees and everything else. The hill is so steep. So if you're down there sometime, right where 7 Mile Road goes right straight on over, past the Good Time Party Store, try to walk up that hill sometime. But up until just recently, you still see the concrete blocks on where the tower was. That's a good tower. Mr. Hall, at one time, ski jumped out in Colorado, and he jumped 204 feet. And that was a world's champion. At one time, Mr. Hall was the world's champion of the whole world. So of ski jumping 204 feet. And he is up in Ishpeming, and what do you call it up there, the Hall of Fame, or the Hall of Fame in Ishpeming, Maine. So he was a great ski jumper, and probably one time the best in the world. My own experience on the ski jump hill, well, I've seen most all of these things. Seeing them at the tender age of, what am I now, 29, 30? Anyhow, my father had a Model T Ford, four-door, black. All Fords were black. Mr. Ford said the only color is car is black. Anyhow, so to drive in to see the race, the ski jumpers cost $1. $1 a carload, but nobody could ride on the running boards. Everybody had to get in the cars. So sometimes we'd have 3 deep inside the cars to go to watch them jump. And I remember going to the jump, just a little guy, and I put on my galoshes. I was so cold, but I had to stay there and watch them jump. And there's so many thousands of people coming into Northville. The roads were jammed all the way from 7 Mile Road, all the way from Farmington Road up to Northville, bumper to bumper, and all the way in Plymouth, bumper to bumper. And the restaurants in Northville ran right out of food. They had so many people coming into Northville. But that lasted for 3 years, and then eventually Mr. Hall went up to Brighton, and started at Brighton. The Brighton ski jump hill it's not a ski jump hill, it's a downhill it's still going today. Another thing about the ski jump hill, when I was little, on the west side of the ski jump hill, it's real steep and real bumpy. And so we used to go down skiing. Our skis were just about 6 foot long, and we just stick our foot in the little loop there in our galoshes. We didn't have ski boots and all these other fancy things. In those days, we just put our feet in the skis and away we'd go. So if you could ski jump, if you could go down the ski hill without falling, and real rough, well, you're a pretty good ski jumper. So kids would say to me, "Can you ski?" And I say, "Yeah, I can ski." I was probably about 12, 13 years old. They said, "Can you ski jump? Can you ski down the ski jump hill?" I said, "Yes." "Well, you're a pretty good skier then." So that was our yardstick, if we were a good skier or a bad skier. If we could stand up going down that hill, why, you're pretty good. One day, there's an ice storm, and I was about 14 years of age, and you never put any salt on the roads in those days, so I put my ice skates on, and I skated right down the road. I skated over to the ski jump hill. When I went up the ski jump hill, I had to go this way up the hill on a pair of ice skates. And stupidly of me, I thought, well, I'm up here, I guess I'll come down. And boy, did I come down on that sheet of ice. There wasn't any snow, just ice. And I was going so fast, there was tears out of my eyes. I thought, oh my God, if I ever fall, I'm going to kill myself. But luckily, I made it down the hill on a pair of ice skates. So that was kind of interesting. Wayne County Fair in Northville was one of the biggest fairs in the state of Michigan. The only fair that was bigger was the state fair. In those days, the state fair was a really big deal. So once a year, the fair would come to Northville, and it would be for 6 days. And to us kids, the only thing that was important was Christmas time and the Northville Wayne County Fair. They had all kinds of animals. They had chickens, they had ducks, they had cows, they had pigs, they had sheep, they had horses, and they had a beautiful bottle that shows all the different breed, a lot of things on the fair. Okay. My father had a booth down there, and he used to sell radios and different things down there at the fairgrounds. And he made out pretty well. They had buildings there that businessmen of Northville could rent for the 5 days and sell things out of there. Schrader's had their furniture store there, and all the different business places of Northville had a place there. I was the president of the Northville High School class in 1937, so Mrs. Ida V. Cook said, "Bruce, I got an idea for you. Why don't you get a tent and put a tent down at the fairgrounds and sell food and make some money, because you're trying to make some money for the senior class to go to Washington." And I said, "That's a good idea, Mrs. Cook." She was our sponsor. So I went, got the telephone and called a tent company, and they brought a tent over, and we rented a spot in Northville Fairgrounds. And every day our mothers would make pies and cakes, and we sold hot dogs and hamburgers. And in those days, $1 was a lot of money. So at nighttime, there's 5 of us would sleep right down there, so somebody wouldn't steal anything out of our tent, including me. I was one of the people watching it. But after 5 days, we made $700, and that was a lot of money. So Mrs. Cook said, "Well, Bruce, why shoot for the moon? Because you might hit us. No, shoot for the stars. Because shoot for the stars. If you don't hit the stars, you'll hit the moon." So we made $700. We'll tell it later on. We did go to Washington. The fair had a wonderful vaudeville every afternoon and every night. And then every night they had fireworks. And they'd start off in the daytime around 9 o'clock in the morning. It'd go to about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, every night with fireworks. And that was a big deal for Northville. And everybody knew Northville about Northville Wayne County Fair. The Wayne County Fair stopped during World War II, and then in 1945, they started up harness races. And Northville was a village at that time, and so they found out that if Northville was a city, they would get money back from the state. So the next day, Northville was a city. And the first year it became a city, we got $700 from that. How much more now? I think it was 4,000. Anyhow, they built the community building in Northville. It was the first money they got back from the state of Michigan, because now we were a city. And we became a city just overnight. Northville Fair. They had baseball games on the daytime, and all this wonderful vaudeville show, and it was really a big deal. And us kids, we'd go down there and we'd watch them bring in all the horses and all the cows on Sunday, and then we'd go to the fair every day. I had a free pass because my father had a booth down there, and then we'd watch for all the animals leaving again. And then we had to wait the next day till Christmas time. Okay? All right. the next one? Fish hatchery. Okay. The fish hatchery here in Northville, the location of it is up where the tennis courts are, up on 7 Mile Road. And Northville was supposed to be one of the biggest United States fish hatchery in the country. They had about 9 different ponds on that property, and each pond was about 2 to 3 acres of land. And there's a bunch of women, and they had a big building there, and what they would do, they would take the female fish, and they would milk her and get all the eggs out of her, and then they would take the male fish and put a little sperm on the eggs and get the little baby minnows. Once they got the baby minnows, they would take the baby minnows out on the ponds and let the little fish grow. Once they grew, then they'd go out there with nets and net them up there and put them in milk cans and take them all over the state of Michigan and dump them in the lakes. I have one of the milk cans on my front porch. It says right on it, United States Fishery. And that's one of the cans that they would use. Another nice thing about the fish hatchery, they always left one pond open for us kids. So in the summertime, it was our swimming pool. So the water was probably about, I imagine on the front, in the middle, probably around 7 or 8 feet deep. And so it was our swimming pool all summer long. So everybody, all those kids, a lot of the older people, that was the swimming pool. And there's a dam on the creek, up about a mile, almost up the Beck Road. And that water, they would take the water from there, from the creek, and put it in a pipe and bring it down to the first pond. And then that pond would fill up, and go to the second pond, the third pond, the fourth, and the fifth pond. And then the water would go back into the creek again. So that's how they got their water to fill up to raise the fish. Then in the wintertime, the same pool that we used to swim in is our ice skating rink. And so we would go up there and push the snow off the ice, and we'd have a hockey rink. So it was our hockey rink and our swimming pool all summer long. When people used to go to the Mayberry Tuberculosis Sanatorium to visit some of their relatives, they had one pool up there right close to 7 Mile Road with big rainbow trout. And rainbow trout were about 24 to 28 inches long. And they had them in a pool right there. It was only about 6 feet deep. And they had spring water running right through there. The spring is still there today. The spring is on the north side of 7 Mile Road, the little pond there. And the water goes from there underneath 7 Mile Road, and then it goes right into another little pond up there in the creek. So people would stop by there and they go to visit the people going out to Mayberry Sanatorium. Just look at these big rainbow trout. They probably had 25 or 30 of them. And those are the same rainbow trout that they would milk in the wintertime to raise more fish. One day, one of the rainbow trout got out, and we were out there spearing suckers. And I said to my buddy, "Hey, here's a salmon." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's not a sucker." Northville used to have a lot of sucker fish. They would, in the spring, they would run up and down the creek. So, geez, I speared this salmon. I thought it was a salmon. And he said, "You're in trouble, Bruce, because the conservation officer finds you. You got that salmon, you're in big trouble." I said, "I guess I better hide it." He said, "Where are you going to hide it?" I said, "I think I'll stick it underneath my shirt." So I took the fish and he went all the way around my stomach, all the way to my back. I came home here holding my stomach. My mother said, "What's the matter with you?" I said, I got a salmon." "Oh," she said, "that's a rainbow trout." I guess the next day we had rainbow trout dinner. I guess that's not the fish hatchery. The train wreck? Okay. Show the train wreck now. This train wreck was the worst train wreck that ever happened in this part of the country. It happened, get the right date on this. Okay. This has to be Salem train wreck. All right, here we are. July the 20th, 1907. Every year, the Pure Marquette people would get on the train and go to Detroit for their yearly picnic out to Belle Isle. And so the 800 people got on the train this July morning, and they started down to go to Detroit. I was trying to see the town that it came from. Well, it really doesn't matter, but it was farther west of here. But anyhow, they were going about 60 miles an hour. Out here, there's a real steep curve right on the corner of Napier and 5 Mile Road. You go there and go down Napier and stop on Napier on the railroad, and you'll see this real steep curve. And what was happening, there's a work train in Plymouth, and he was working on the tracks, and the train was coming down at 60 miles an hour with 800 people on it, and they got the messages messed up. The message that the men got from down there in Plymouth, they had about 15 or 20 minutes before the train was supposed to get there. I think they read at 9:05. I think the train was supposed to get there they read it at 9:25. And the train got there at 9:05. Here's two engines, one to 60 miles an hour and one standing still on the track. And they smashed together. And of course, they're wooden cars, and 800 people in there, and 34 of them were killed, and 100 of them were injured. And they're injured so badly, some of them had their arms off, some had their legs off, so that 100 people is really like 134 people being killed. And of course, they sent out a train from Detroit with doctors and nurses there to help pick up the dead and help up the wounded and take them back down to Detroit. The man in charge here that read the directions, they brought him into Northville and had a big jury case, and they're going to put him in jail, put him in prison. So they finally let him go. So they fired him, of course. But they finally let him go. I think that's pretty much the train. Well, just one thing about the train. This one doctor, he was, oh, excuse me, well, one more thing. They took the dead bodies. There's a real nice real nice orchard there. They took the dead bodies and lined them up like cordwood in the orchard. And there's one doctor, he was so shook up, he had a lady's arm. He was walking around with the lady's arm in his hand. And so somebody said, "What do you got?" He said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." But it was such a shock to him. Even he was in shock. That I wasn't there at. Mayberry State Park, okay. Mayberry State Park, in the early days, the only thing that cured tuberculosis was sunshine and fresh air. And Northville had a lot of fresh air and sunshine. So Mr. Mayberry built Mayberry State Park, Mayberry Tuberculosis Sanatorium, which is now Mayberry State Park. And to get out here, they had to have a road. So at one time, this is on your test too, at one time, 7 Mile Road was the longest paved road in the state of Michigan. It started on Lake St. Clair and went all the way up to, this way, all the way up to Mayberry Tuberculosis Sanatorium. Mayberry Sanatorium, at their main building, had 800 patients in it. The University of Michigan main hospital has 800 patients in it. So you can imagine how big that hospital was. Mayberry Sanatorium was a city within a city. It had its own power plant, it had everything out there, and about half of Northville worked out there. There's a lot of people working right out there at Mayberry State Park. One story is to show the front gate. One story, this one lady happened to be a black lady. She was coming out there in an ambulance, and she had tuberculosis from Detroit. She said, hold it right there. And the ambulance driver said, what do you want to hold it for? She said, look at that sign up there. It said, may bury. She said, may bury me now, may bury me later. She said, I'm not going in there. He said, yes, you are. So he finally talked her into going into there. So anyhow, later on they found out another thing they could cure tuberculosis from. They would take one lung and stop it. They'd close it down and let it heal. And the person was living just on one lung. And they'd get that lung healed, and then they'd pump it back up again, and then they'd stop this one. And then after a year or two, if they're lucky, they live. And they're off tuberculosis. About that time, we had an electrical store, and I'd get phone calls from Detroit, and a television had just come out. Television came out, say probably about 1949. Oh, no, it's earlier than that. Well, anyhow, television first came out. And I'd get phone calls, and they'd say, we have a patient out in Mayberry State Park. Would you take a television set out to him? I say, yeah. Send me a check. I'll get the check and give me the room number. I get the television out to him. So I'd get the check. So I'd say to one of my electricians, hey, I got a job for you today. They say, what's that, Bruce? I say, I got a television for you to take out to Mayberry State Park, the Mayberry Tuberculosis Sanatorium, to a patient. He said, oh, yeah? He said, who do you think is going to take that television out there? I said, you are. He said, I got news for you. You're taking it. I'm not going to go out there. I'm afraid to get tuberculosis. So I took it out. So I'd go out there, and they'd take the patient, and he or she would be over in the corner, and they'd put a mask on me, and I'd go in there and hook up the television, and all set. They had never seen television before, so they're just thrilled. So anyhow, so that worked out real good. Just one more story. We also did the wiring out there. One of our electricians was out there wiring in the nurses' quarters. And the nurses' quarters were just a room with no ceiling on it, and he was up in the rafters working up there, and this real pretty nurse came in, quite well proportioned, and she was getting ready to take a shower. So she started taking her clothes off, and our electrician looked down, and he didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he was hollering, hey, I'm up here. But she started taking her clothes off, and she got most of her clothes off, and then she started doing a little massaging. And so he got so excited, he dropped his hammer. And his hammer went down, and she looked up and she said, "Oh!" And he said, "Oh!" So she turned him in, and she said, "You're going to fire him, get rid of him," because he was peeking at her. Well, anyhow, my father didn't fire him, because anyway, he came back. He said, my father, he said, Mr. Turnbull, my father, he said, I didn't know what to do, and she took her clothes off so fast. He said, anyhow, my father said, well, okay, don't ever do it again. How are we doing on our time? A little faster? All right. All right. The plane crash? Okay. Gene Angel is here. We're going to talk about the plane crash. This airplane crashed right on Katy Street, right on the Katy and First Street. And Gene Angel was working at the bank at the time, and she said that they called her at the bank and said, Gene, get home because the airplane crashed right next to your mother-in-law's house. So she ran all the way from the bank, all the way down to where the crash was. I talked to Jane just a few minutes ago. I said, could you run down there now? And she said, no, she couldn't run there. But anyhow, she ran down there. And what happened, this jet airplane came right over Northville and had trouble, mechanical trouble. So the pilot took the plane and aimed it towards South Lyon. Then he jumped out of the airplane and came down in Hines Parkway Drive in a parachute, which was fine. He figured the plane would go out around South Lyon somewhere in a farm and crash out there. Well, the plane changed its mind. It turned around and came right back to Northville. It got right over Northville, and it went right straight up. And it went until finally ran low on fuel, and then it turned around and came right straight down. And it lit right in the backyard of two little old ladies, and their backyard was 150 feet deep and 50 foot wide. Jet airplane wings are 50 foot wide. The plane hit right in the middle of their garden. It didn't touch anything at all, but it drove a hole in the ground 10 feet deep. And there are two little children right next door, and Mr. King was he was in charge of the police department in Northville. He got a phone call, and he said, there's been a plane crash. And he said, where? And he told him, he said, oh my God, that's right next to my house. So he got in the police car and he came home, and when the plane crashed, it still had some fuel on it, and the fuel flew right on his two children. And it flew on the girl and the boy. And Mr. King, chief of police, said to his son, well, what happened? Well, he said, I heard the plane coming. A lot of people heard the plane coming. My wife was over on Eden Drive. She heard the plane coming. One of my sons was down by the creek, and he heard it coming. So everybody was running to see the crash. So what happened, he said, well, Daddy, he said, I heard the plane, I heard this coming down. He said, I got to run away. He was about 6 years old, and his 4-year-old daughter, or 4-year-old sister, got her foot caught in the roof. So he went back to help her get her foot out of the roof, and the plane crashed and burned them both real badly. They were at the University of Michigan Hospital for months and months, but they both lived. But when the plane crashed, some of the flames flew up and set the house on fire across the street on Katy Street. But that's the only thing that ever hit the house. If a plane had come in on the angle, or over one way or the other way, it would have wiped out that part of Northville. And the gold cure in the early days, to cure, if you're alcoholic, if you're on drugs, you could take gold tablets and it would cure them. A lot of things that you had problems by these gold tablets would cure them. So that's another thing that made Northville famous. They had a gold cure treatment here in Northville, and the fellow's house, the doctor's house, it shows the doctor's house in it. Okay, the doctor's house is right up here across from the old schoolhouse, right on Main Street. Then his dormitory was down on Main Street, down by Griswold. So the people would come in and pay the money and stay there for 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week, and take gold tablets, and they're supposed to cure them from dope and smoking and booze and a lot of different things. And so it was quite the popular thing to do, to take gold treatments. Later on, that same building that was there, Schrader started a funeral parlor there. And so I was the president of the Rotary Club. So this fellow came in and he said, I'd like to belong to the Rotary Club. And I said, well, you got to be something, an electrician or a plumber, or you got to have a vocation. I said, what is your vocation? He said, I'm a boxer. And I looked at him and I said, about 150 pounds? He said, no, I'm a funeral director. Okay. Next one. The condenser. This is the good one. This is on your test too. This also made Northville famous. Mr. Rogers came up with the idea to take and make condensed milk. He, in his lab, and he worked and worked and worked and worked, and finally came up with the idea you could take milk and put it in a can and condense it. He lived down on the corner of what is now at 7 Mile Road and Rogers Street. But he had his condensary right down there. Later on, he moved his condensary over on Base Line Road. That's where that picture is, on Base Line Road. But it was so famous. Listen to this one, a test question. He was the first man in the world to come up with condensed milk right here in North. And he was so famous, they named the street after him, Rogers Street. So I guess that's pretty good on that one. What's the next one? Oh, the house in Buelltown? Okay, this is another good one. Mr. Rayson lived on Rayson Street, and in the wintertime, there's this big icicle hanging on top of his house. Wait a minute, I gotta blow my nose. So he said, honey, I'm all right. He said, honey, watch out. When you come out of the house there, this big icicle is on the house. And it might fall and hit you on the head. So she said, okay. So she went to go out the door to go over to the neighbors and have a cup of coffee. She slammed the door. Down came the icicle. Hit her on the head and killed her. So she laid there in the snow. And he said, who was the lady who was killed with the icicle? And she said, well, she was a lady who had a big garden, and she grew cabbages. So different parts of Northville are called different things. So they call that part of Northville Cabbage Town. That's Cabbage Town right now to Northville, all the way down by the cider mill, and that whole area down by the pond. That's Cabbage Town, because she was killed by the icicle in Cabbage Town. And every Halloween right now, they have a tour of the cemetery, and they have ladies, her cemetery tombstone is right over here in the cemetery on Katy Street, and they will have a lady all dressed up like Mrs. Rayson with a spotlight on her, and it tells the whole story about her getting hit with the icicle. And that's on every year, so any of the children, if your children go on that Halloween tour, you'll see this whole story I'm telling you about. Okay? What's the next one? Cider mill. Mr. Parmeter came out of the Civil War, and they gave him so much bonus to come out of the Civil War, so he took his Civil War money and started the cider mill. The Civil War ended, as I remember, around 1855. So that's when that's when the Parmeter cider mill started. And it's been going ever since. The original building burnt down, so they built another building now. And they also sell wine down there now. It's not too bad of a wine. It says Northville wine right on it. So if you want a bottle of wine of Northville wine, you've got a bottle of wine there. And when I was in high school, we were trying to raise our money to go to Washington. So I talked to Mr. Parmeter, not him, but his grandson named Bob Parmeter was in Northville High School at the same time I was. I said, we want to raise some money. What do we do? He said, go out in the orchards here outside the orchard and pick the apples and bring the crates of apples in, and we'll squeeze them and we'll put them in jugs, and we'll sell you the jugs of cider for 75 cents, and you can sell them for $1. So for 25 cents, we just sold hundreds of gallons of cider. All of our parents bought cider, and all of our friends bought cider, 25 cents. We made 25 cents on every gallon of cider. And that helped us go to Washington. What's the next one? Well, the Opera House. What does it show? What just shows the one building? Oh, okay. The Opera House here in Northville, it was a beautiful building, and the location of that was right on the corner of Dunlap and North Center Street. And it would hold about 700 people. So Brian has on all of your tables, it shows another real nice picture of the Opera House. It shows that inside of it, and it has had an extra deck there and a beautiful stage. And in about 1965, they're going to tear the Opera House down. And so they had a showing of it. So anybody in Northville want to go up and see the old Opera House, why they opened up the doors and you'd go up 2 or 3 flights of stairs, and you'd end up in the opera house, the very top of the opera house, and you look down on it and see the wonderful opera house. But it's kind of interesting. I went and saw it before they tore the building down, but I also had snuck in there when I was a kid. My boyfriend and I went over there and took the boards off the window, and we went in and we saw the opera house. When I was probably about 14 or so, living. I was an angel, but sometimes I did things that I shouldn't do. But anyhow, we went in and saw the opera house, looked all around and saw the stage, and I thought it was a big eagle over the stage, but it turned out to be an owl, a big owl over the stage. But we had seen it, and there's a man named Mr. Pickard, and he had a butcher shop on the first floor on the left-hand side. And Mr. Henry Ford wanted an opera house to take over to Greenfield Village. So he came over to Northville and saw Mr. Pickard, and he said, "Mr. Pickard, how much do you want for your opera house?" He said, $25,000. But he said, "You, Mr. Ford, you're a rich man, so for you, it's $30,000. Mr. Ford said, "Listen, before I give you $30,000, you can take it brick by brick and tear it down." And that's exactly what happened. They tore it down. If you go down to Greenfield Village, you'll see an opera house down there, just like Northville's, but it could have been Northville's, but it wasn't. Well, the trolley cars, okay. Northville, from about 1899 to 1999, had 2 streetcar lines. One streetcar line started in Detroit and went to Dearborn. And from Dearborn it went to Wayne. And then from Wayne it went to Plymouth. And from Plymouth it went to Northville. The other streetcar line went from Northville down 8 Mile Road to Farmington, and then Farmington right down Grand River, right downtown Detroit. They would have rapid transportation every hour on the hour, right out of Northville to downtown Detroit. Not only would they take people, but they would take mail, they would take vegetables. The man in Farmington said, "I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some free property to take your streetcar right across my property, because when you go up Farmington Road, why, it's on an angle on Grand River, and you cut right straight across there and save about a quarter of a mile at a time." So they said, "Okay, that's fine." But he had a dairy. He was smart. So what he would do every morning, the streetcar would come by, he'd put his cans of milk on the streetcar, and they'd take it down in Detroit. He was just a smart man. Later on, he became governor of Michigan. So anyhow, I know as a boy, I used to ride the streetcar, and we'd go over to Pontiac to visit my grandmother, and my sister and myself, and my mother said, "Now get a free transfer in Farmington." So I think it cost a quarter to ride the streetcar to Farmington. So we'd go to Farmington, get a transfer, and go to Pontiac, visit my grandmother, and then we'd come all the way back on the streetcar. But the streetcars were beautiful cars. They had a bathroom on them. They had a drinking fountain on them. They were really elaborate and very, very nice. And they used to go between, after 50 miles an hour, and in the muddy roads, why, if you could drive your car 10 or 15 miles an hour, you're doing pretty good. But there was a fast transportation. The trouble is going down 8 Mile Road, they picked off a few cows. And, I think they still call that front of the streetcar a cow catcher. So the cows couldn't get out of the way fast enough. Sessions Hospital, location's that right up here on Main Street. They call it Star Manor now. And it's one of the better places around for elderly people to take care of. But in the early days, it was the baby hospital, the whole area. Every town had their own hospital. Northville had theirs, Plymouth had theirs. Every town had their own hospital. And our oldest son, Bob, was born in the hospital here when I was in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps were real generous. They paid the hospital $50 to have a baby. I don't know what it costs to have a baby now, but it's a few $1,000s. But anyhow, that's where Bob was born, right there in Sessions Hospital. I was on the committee who started making St. Mary's Hospital. And I went up and down the street to the businessmen in Northville. They said, we don't need a hospital. We got a hospital. So we kept saying, look, this area is going to grow. We need St. Mary's Hospital. So they finally contributed enough money. They made St. Mary's Hospital. The which? Oh, so the crow's nest? That crow's nest, downtown Northville, that's what Northville looked like back in the early days. That crow's nest was right there. The crow's nest was just a structure and had a ladder, you could go up into it. And on Friday nights, well, it was really Saturday nights. Saturday night was the Northville night. The bands would go up there and play music. And so everybody would go up there and listen to all the nice music, and the music would go all around the area. If the politicians came in there and wanted to give a speech, they'd go up there and give a speech. And so it's right in the middle of the street, so you'd drive your car down, you had to go around that structure, which is called the crow's nest. And so they kept saying, well, eventually we're going to have to take that down. Well, some of the kids heard about it, and I wasn't in on this one. I missed this one. But it came Halloween time, they greased the track from the streetcar. So the streetcar came up Main Street, and the man put on the brakes, and he kept right going. And he hit the crow's nest and tipped it right over. Anyhow, so that was the end of the crow's nest. And Jim Spagnolia, who had a liquor store in Northville. Before that, he had a grocery store in there. He said, hey, Bruce, he said, he's Italian. He said, hey, Bruce, he said, those damn other kids, he said, they greased the tracks and they knocked over the crow's nest. He said, what do you think about that? I said, well, that's awful, Jim. There was Jim Spagnolia, and then he had a son, and he had a whole family in there. Okay, anything else? Oh, Silver Springs. Okay, that's a good one. The bottle got over there. That's the silver. That's in Northville. In the early days, I think they show a picture of the building too. That shows the building. Okay, in the early days, why you could go down there, and they had a bottling works there. In this spring, they had about a 6-foot square, all lighted, and you could look right down, and the sand was just bubbling up with Silver Springs water, and it was the finest water of anything around. And so what they would do, they would take that water and put it in 5-gallon jugs, and take it into Detroit and put it in Jail Hudson building and all the different stores, all the big buildings in Detroit. They would sell it to them, and they would cool it down in refrigeration, and it had right on all the bottles, this is made in Northville, Silver Springs water. On the trains, they used to come through here. The trains would come through here, and in their fancy dining rooms, they would say, we serve only Northville Silver Springs water. They also had a bottling works, and they had about 4 different brands of pop. And they'd make pop from the Silver Springs water, and they would ship it all around Michigan. And there's always been a gas station up where Asher's gas station used to be. And we lived on 222 Fairbrook, which is right down by the racetrack. And so we used to walk up or take our bicycles and go up to the gas station and buy a bottle of pop, and the bottle of pop was a nickel. So they had orange, and they had about 4 different varieties of pop. So very, very famous. That made Northville famous also. That's on your test. Okay, anything else on that one? Oh, the railroad station. The railroad station there, in the early days when the train would go by, this is quite interesting. The trains would go through Northville. They would come down from Bay City and go to Plymouth and then into Detroit, or they'd go south, just like they do right now. But I'm going to have to check on this too, but you can check on it. Right behind this spring out there where the water is flowing out of there right now, right by the Chamber of Commerce, there's a little place about 3 steps. And there's a little hook over there, right over where the train tracks were. The mailman would come down there and take the bag of mail and hang it on the rack. The trains would come by there at 50 miles an hour with a big hook, and he'd reach out there with a hook and pick up that bag of mail and never stop in Northville, and away he'd go. And his name was Mr. Perrin, and he had a son, and so one day his son said to me, we're supposed to go over to the post office there and get the bag of mail and take it down and put it up on the hook. So we didn't put it properly on the hook, and the train went flying by, and the hooked the bag, and ripped it. Didn't get the hook. So we're all around there picking up mail and taking it all right back to the post office again. But inside there, when our senior class finally went to Washington, and we left right there from the depot, and we went down there, and we went to Washington, and we're there for 3 days and 3 nights, and it cost us $37.50. Mrs. Ida B. Cook was our sponsor, so I said, Mrs. Cook, why don't you come with us? And she said, oh my golly, Bruce, I don't have $37. So we all chipped in, and we took Mrs. Cook down there for free. It's an aircraft. This is another good. This one's on your test. Mr. Stinson had an aircraft factory right in Northville, right down by the Chamber of Commerce, right down there on Katy Street and South Main Street. He made the beautiful airplanes down there, called Stinson. Later on, he sold out the Stinson to Piper Cub. The Piper Cub airplane today is the old-fashioned Stinson. If you go down to Ford Village in Dearborn, you'll find a Stinson airplane hanging up in the rafters up down there in Greenfield Village, and it's painted yellow. So if you're down there sometime, look up there, and here's a Stinson airplane hanging up there. One day, my father said to me, we're going out to Northville had an airfield out on 6 Mile Road. 6 Mile Road and Beck Road. Westland Beck Road. Anyhow, I said, oh, he said, what's going on out there? He said, a lady called Amelia Earhart is going to fly into Northville. I said, well, who is Amelia Earhart? And I was probably only about 10 years of age. He said, Amelia Earhart is probably one of the finest airplane pilots in the world. And she's going to try to fly around the world. But she's stopping in Northville. So out we went. And so we got there a little early, so my father said, you want to take an airplane ride? And I looked and it was $5 to take an airplane ride for one people. But he talked the first pilot into taking me and my father for $5. And the pilot sat up in the front, it was all open, and we sat back, and it was so noisy. And so we kept flying around Northville. My father kept hitting me on the shoulder and said, look down, look down. And I was so scared. I was just looking inside the airplane, and I see all these different gauges. But anyhow, so I never got my $5 worth, but I guess my dad did. So we finally landed, and Mrs. Amelia Earhart came in a real slick airplane, stopped, stood on the wing of her plane, and waved to everybody, and then she got in her plane and flew to California. From there, she took the trip around the world. You know all the story. You never have found what happened to her. They think they found parts of her on an island. My own idea is that she flew over some of the places that the Japanese were getting ready for Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese couldn't afford to let her get back and pass that word around, so they shot her down. That's just my own idea. Okay. Every part of Northville has a different name for it. For the Globe Furniture Factory, it's called Bealtown. Because Mr. Beal, he was the supervisor of the furniture factory. And they made all wonderful furniture down there for church furniture, and they also made desks, school desks. If you ever go to an antique store and see a desk that's got a globe on it, like the American world globe, it was made in Northville, Michigan. I have one in my house, and it's a very, very nice old-fashioned school desk. But Mr. Beal, he had about 250 people working for him, and they all lived down in those little houses in Bealtown. That's in that section of town. So that's why they call it Bealtown. And he was a big Methodist. He put up a lot of money to build the church on Dunlap Street. And all the pews that were in the church, he made those in his factory. And all the beautiful woodwork in the ceiling was made there in that factory. Right now, the man who owns it right now, he has a beautiful apartment upstairs. And I used to take people on tours up there, and he really has a cathedral ceiling, because upstairs in the cathedral ceiling is all the beautiful rafters of that beautiful old Methodist church. So, got enough? Oh, the last one. Okay, well, they got all about the Methodist church, haven't they? All right, I got two things to tell you there. And you must be getting tired of sitting down there. But anyhow, in 1924, the minister in the Methodist church said, ladies and gentlemen, if you come down to our church this afternoon at 3 o'clock, Mr. Turnbull, my father, he's going to try to get a radio to reach all the way into Detroit. No wires. And he's going to do his very best so you can hear a thing called radio. And there wasn't any such thing as radio. So on Saturday afternoon, my father went over to the bell tower over on Dunlap Street, went way up in the tower and put a copper wire up there for an aerial and brought it all the way down and went over to the pulpit, hooked it up there to an old Atwater Kent radio with a bunch of knobs on it. So then the church was packed with people, so he was over there turning all the knobs, and all of a sudden he listened there, and on the radio it said, "This is WWJ, Detroit, Michigan." And everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation. The first time they'd ever heard radio 25 miles away, no wires. Look what happened today. Television, all these other things happened since 1924. Okay, one more story? Okay. Then I'm all done. Gotta make sure what his name. Anyhow, there's a Methodist minister in Northville. Anyhow, I was invited to play golf with him. This was years back. And the Methodist Church had a tournament out at Box Hills. That's an H. Anyhow, so I had never met him, so I think I was a Baptist. Anyhow, so they said, "This is Mr. Reverend Hinch." And I said, "Nice to meet you, Reverend." He said, "I'm in your foursome." I said, "Oh, good." So we started playing golf and got in the first hole, and it's a par 4. And I was playing pretty good golf. I got a 5. And he said, "Hey, Bruce, what did you get in that hole?" I said, "I got a 5. I was keeping score. And he said, "By golly, that's what I got. I got a 7. And that kind of upset me a little bit. But I like the people, if they get a 5, stay 5. They got a 7, anyway. So the next hole we came to, it was a par 3. He said, "Hey, Bruce, what'd you get in that one?" I said, "I got a 4. By golly," he said, "that's what I got. I got a 5. So I thought, "You son of a gun." So we got to the next hole. I thought, "I'm going to pick you." So it was a par 5. So he finally got on the green in 7. And so I said, "Okay, Reverend, you're on the green in 7. Now let's see how many putts it takes you." Well, it took him 3 putts. We had a 10. But if I told him what I was going to get, he probably would have told me, "That's what I got." So I kept him honest. So on the next hole, I had a brand new golf ball, and I hit it in the woods. And I was really unhappy, and I said, "Oh, a naughty word." And I said, "Oh, Reverend," she's like, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." He said, "It's okay, Bruce, it's okay." So a real nice Reverend. On the next hole, he put a brand new ball in the lake. He said, "Hey, Bruce." I said, What is it, Reverend?" He said, "Say it for me." I said, well, he said, Bruce, where are you?" I said, "I'm over here." "Where are you?" I said, "I'm over here." "Say it for me." "Billy, old boy, You're one of the good old boys, so you're fine. So where are you? I'm here, and I appreciate I'm here. Thank you.